Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first part of today's or of the Yealink Management Cloud Service webinar. I just wanted to quickly confirm if you can hear me. The attendees are able to hear me. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Now let me quickly move that screen over here. Okay. So the agenda from today is we look into the YMCS and the features. We look into YMCS IP phone provisioning as single device or as a batch. We have an IP phone hands-on, provisioning an IP phone, and firmware maintenance will be covered there. We look at Microsoft Teams Rooms devices in an overview and features, and then we have a hands-on on how to add and manage MTR devices. What is YMCS? YMCS stands for Yealink Cloud Management Service and offers the option of provisioning of devices, single or mass provisioning, configuration of devices, groups, sites, resource management, firmware configurations, task management, alarm and diagnosis, statistics. Resource management, task management, alarm, diagnostic statistics, that's something we will cover in the second part next week. That all is available for desk phones, Teams Rooms devices, and USB devices such as webcams, headsets, these kind of accessories. Now, what we always get asked is a question in regards of how secure is the YMCS, especially when people know that Yealink is a Chinese company. Chinese companies doesn't mean that it has to be a virus involved all the time. Yealink is focusing on a very, very high security control. They are part of the ISO IEC 2000 or 27001 SOC 2 Type 2, and they are also certified with the General Data Protection Regulation from the European economy. The YMCS servers are located in Australia, New South Wales for our area. So for the Australian, New Zealand area, they are located there. So which means no user data will leave the country. Now, does the YMCS cost something? The IP phones version is free for up to 1,000 devices. As soon as we cross that point, we would have to pay $9.90 per device per year. So which means the 1,001st device would have to be paid for. The 1,002nd device then also would have to be paid for, but the first 1,000 devices are free. For the MTR devices, the Room Essential is free. We have their conference room management, the running state in a dashboard, conference room equipment management, and the configuration management. If we want to do a little bit more in that regard, we would have to do a professional license in that point, and that is $48 per room per year. There you see we have additionally to the free features, we have remote control, alarm, ServiceNow, and Insight available. Now, how do you auto provision or how do you manage the devices? So the auto provisioning of IP phones is based on RPS, which is called reprovisioning service. This is a vendor-based reprovisioning service located in the internet and in the way of Yealink, it's a part of the YMCS. Meanwhile, it used to be a separate part, but it's a part of the YMCS now. This is the service we, for example, use in combination with 3CX, and also all the examples further down with IP phones will be mainly linked to 3CX. RPS generally works in a combination of the device's MAC address, the device's serial number, and when using 3.6, for example, a provisioning link. With other PBXs, it can be that a configuration file is required. Now, in order to get the device configured on RPS, we have to collect a little bit of data for the device, also to be able to add it into the system. With the YMCS, we require the model, what kind of model it is, the MAC address, the device's serial number, and then a config file, for example. Again, if the PBX that is used works with that, with 3CX, we require just the provisioning link, and then certain vendor dedicated information for certain setups, but that is also not 3CX relevant. Now, how does it work? Upon boot in factory defaulted condition, any IP phone, regardless of which vendor, is contacting the vendor provisioning service. The vendor checks if for the device's MAC address an entry is available or not. If no entry is available, the provisioning is skipped. If an entry is available, provisioning information is sent to the device. Now, again, we will have to add information first to there. First of all, we would have to add the device as such with MAC serial and model type. The provisioning link provided by the provisioning server is used by the phone to connect to the PBX and so receive the configuration information and then register on the PBX. Since the phone contacts the vendor service located on the internet, the phone can get provisioned regardless on its location. However, there might be some route configurations, these kind of things that interfere with those settings. Since this works from everywhere and is not limited to single locations or number of devices, this version is perfect for dropship devices, deployment of any number of devices. Now, what is required and how is it configured? So in the first row, we have all these three parties. We have the phone, we have the vendor provisioning service, and we have the PBX. The PBX can be anywhere, more or less. The phone boots up, places the request on if there are any configuration information is available on the vendor provisioning service. It is receiving provisioning information in case there is anything there. With that configuration information, it would go to the PBX and request the configuration information. The PBX then, based on that the MAC address of the phone is already available on the phone system, sends the configuration information to the phone, and the phone is then getting configured and is registering to the PBX. To achieve a single phone provisioning using RPS, we need to prepare the following steps. Create the customer business on the RPS server, more than one server entries possible per business. Add Yealink device using MAC and serial and bind the relevant RPS server. Create and configure an extension on 3.6, including adding the matching phone MAC. Factory default the device or plug a new device into the network. The rundown that we do now show with screenshots is expecting that the PBX side has already been prepared, because this is not a training on how to configure a 3.6. This is showing the YMCS side. So in the first way, you as the reseller, installer, you would require a RPS or YMCS account. Contact us with the following information: company name, so your business name, the contact name, the time zone, the contact email. In the best way there, use a generic email, either tech or support or info or what else ever. That's just coming down to if the contact person at some point or the responsible person leaves the company once, and the password is lost, you will not really have opportunities then there to retrieve the password. And then you let us know what you want, if you want to have the YMCS or RPS. Once the account was created, you then can visit the Yealink or the YMCS login page and use the login that you have. Now, in the setup, you go to the RPS management, you enter the server, you add a server, for example, for your customer. When you want to add phones for a certain customer, you create the first server inside there. You can have multiple servers for the same customer. It's just coming down on how you name them. Fill out the relevant fields. Generally, you would fill out the server name so that you know for which customer that is, and then you would enter there the server URL, which would be the provisioning link towards the 3CX. Set up RPS, you would then more or less again add the business name, company customer name, branch name, business name, and PBX, whatever, just something, a unique identifier that you know which server it is. And then again, the provisioning link from the 3CX. Any additional certificates if necessary, and save. If you use 3CX as a with the 3CX FQDN, you would require no additional certificates from that perspective. Again, you only need to add new servers for new provisioning links, e.g. new 3CXs. You don't need to add the server for every new device on the same system. You add that server once because the provisioning link with the 3.6, for example, is always the same. So if you have a system that has a couple of hundred phones and you start that system from scratch new, you in the end add that server once, and then all the phones get provisioned the same way to the same server. Then you would add a new device. In the device section, you would choose phone device. You would then add there in the site directory your customer's business. Again, you can then have parent and sub-sites where you can have, for example, if you have multiple branches with the phones, you can then structure them by branches. You then assign a phone to a branch, for example, that can then be a part of the sub-accounts. You add a single device management, phone device, add device, you add a device name, you add a MAC and serial, you add the relevant site, and then you choose the model. You then choose advanced settings at the bottom, and then you choose the relevant RPS server. If it's your first setup, then you have the server already there. You confirm with OK, and then you are generally finished. Once the device is added to the network, it will be registered and receive the provisioning link information. Now, you might think, oh, that is pretty painful if I have to add 100, 200 devices, or even 50 or even 20. Yes, it is, but mass provisioning. Knowing now that single device can be auto-provisioned using YMCS RPS, one can imagine that there's also a way to use this for mass provisioning of devices. With 3.6, this generally can be done automatically. However, there's a little flaw with that. The devices are added to 3.6's RPS, so then they can't be accessed from the installer. So by default now with version 20, 3.6 adds the devices. When you add them on 3.6, adds them to their own RPS. So there, if you want to use your RPS, you would have to disable that function, which can be done in the phones section under options. If 3.6 manages the phones with their RPS, they are only available for 14 days. After that, they are auto-removed. But we want to have the devices to stay on the YMCS to be able to use the YMCS features like PCAPs, locks, firmware updates, restart, all that kind of stuff. So therefore, we don't want to have them controlled by 3.6, and therefore we would have to disable that functionality and then have full control on these devices. Now, for mass provisioning, what do we require? We require a provisioning server, which can be either a router in your network, DHCP option 66, that's the old way, or we use a vendor-based setup. We need a 3.6 provisioning link, or, for example, as mentioned prior, a config file if we use another PBX. All phones, MAC, and serial numbers. For having phones mass provisioned, we would have to do the same steps as the single device. We would have to factory default existing phones or plug in a new phone and enjoy it. Again, if you look now on the whole process that we had for a single device, you might think how this will speed up the deployment. The mass provisioning is not fully the same step. Again, we of course require a server, but that server we add once with that provisioning link. After that, we can use CSV files. We can use CSV files on 3.6 to add new extensions and their respective phones, and we can also do that on YMCS. We fill out all that information and upload them. Now, what I usually advise to do on the for the mass import is we go inside the device management platform. We go to import at the top, and then we download the template. Of course, when we use RPS server, we would then click on the icon yes under RPS server. Once downloaded and opened, we will find a huge file. It has a lot of information there. It has some red entries and some other information that might be a little bit confusing. Now, what we generally require is the information that one single phone has inside such a setup, such a file. So for that, what I usually do is I add one single device to the right server, bind that to the right server, and then I export the device list. When that device list is exported, you see that further down the track, we see the MAC address, we see the device model, we see the device name, we see the serial number with Yealink. Yealink calls the serial number machine ID, but it's the serial number. We see the site, and we see then further down if we have to synchronize it to RPS, or however, we see the server name, the RPS server name, and when we do that with 3CX combination, that's literally everything. Now, all we have to do is add additional MAC addresses, model numbers, give them a device name, add the machine ID, add the site, choose synchronize to RPS, the server name, and then the server URL. That's all you have to do. And if you know how XLS works or a CSV, you know that you can, beside the model, or when they all have the same model, beside the MAC, the device name, the serial number, you just can literally track down everything that you have there, and you have all the same values in there, or you copy what you have in there and then you mark everything below and you paste, and done. Save it. Then at the end, of course, you will have to remove the original device from that list so that you have no error when you upload that list. Yeah, so just remove that whole line there. Then go into the YMCS device management and choose import. This will then import all your new devices, and these devices then will also be assigned to the server and to the matching server URL. And this is how you can literally provision 50, 100, 200, 500 phones more or less easily. That's the preparation work, what you have to do. And then the rest is, of course, prepare them on the phone system and then just plug them in. Auto provisioning firmware, we can also then add firmware to the phones once they are up. And once they are registered on the YMCS, we can also push firmware to them. That has to be done manually. There is no way at the moment on actually say, okay, assign that firmware to the phone once it becomes online. You have to do it manually, but you can do first at all the phones, then you literally push the firmware to all of them. You can push the firmware to multiple phones if you require dedicated firmware. Yeah, and then you literally can also do that by the site. So we quickly will look onto how that is done. So we see here we have an IP phone. That phone is currently having an older firmware that's out of the time when 3CXs had the router phones freshly deployed, and Yealink didn't have the relevant firmware yet available. So you see here I have the site directory, I have a parent site, which is my name. Now I go to add a additional site. That will then use or be below the parent site, which is my YMCS account. Yeah, so I am on the top level now there. Yeah. What we can do, we can add auto assign by device IP, also device by IP rule. We can define that devices coming from public or private IPs are automatically assigned to that site, which then would make it also easier in that regard. So you see now in the tree, we have the parent and the subsite, and there we, of course, can then add further sub-sites, sub-branches. Yeah, so this is how I then can build up the tree properly. Now on the 3CX, I have there a phone that I have to add. In the phone section there, I will have to disable that section if I want to entirely control the phones by myself and not have 3CX add them there. So now we define to configure a phone on the 3CX's end. We define that it's this model. We enter the MAC address. Then, since it is an SBC phone, we choose connect directly. And we would require that provisioning link and put that into the RPS server. So we save that device now, but we do not plug the phone in already, yeah, or we don't restart it. Factory defaulted. You see it at the right bottom down there. So now we are in the RPS section. We have already had that entered. We delete that quickly and we re-enter it so that you see how easy that is. So we give it a name. That's then the server name again. Make it as unique as possible. Username, password, you don't have to add in there. You would have to do that for security reasons if you want on the phone level then further. Now, custom certificates and all that stuff you would have to only add if you use your own FQDN. So if you use split DNS, for example. Then you save that all. The server is now created. Yeah. We have all the necessary information in there, and that will apply for all phones on that site. Now you see in the parent directory, and we have then the subdirectory there, and you have to make sure that you add the phones into the right directory. Now we would add there whatever T57W training also. We would add the MAC address. We would add the machine ID. We choose the model. We would choose the correct site where it belongs to. Then if you have a phone that does not use provisioning links and all that stuff, you would have to then add an account or a config file. You see now under advanced settings, we did choose the right server. We don't need a unique server URL. On the username password, you can add username password to verify that the phone is done by the correct added or received by the correct person. I use that auto refresh there just that you can see then once the device is up. Now, what I do on the bottom right on the phone, I choose reset to factory so that the phone actually is able to have a clean setup when it comes up and asks for the connection to the RPS. This might go a moment. Okay, we see the phone is receiving an IP address, which is quite normal for after a reboot. And now the phone will try to connect to the API. So we see at the very top, it says redirector, and then it said config update. And you see already the 3CX backend logo. You see the extension that it had, and we should see it online now here. Yeah. Then the phone is usually making a reboot. That's what's unique or what's mainly happening with the Yealink phones. That comes down to the vendor if they do a reboot or if they just write the new version automatically themselves. So we see then there the local, the private IP, and we see the public IP. We then also see the account status, the status of the device, we see the firmware version, and all these kind of things. Now, since that phone is on a elder firmware version, then the 3CX requires to have the phone working as a SBC phone. You will see the device will not register to the 3CX because it can't use the SBC registration. We would have to update the firmware. So we now head over to the tasks, not to the resources actually there. I have downloaded already the latest firmware. You see that one has that's the latest from Yealink, and this one is the one we want from 3.6. So what I can do then there, I have prepared that all already. To push the firmware immediately, I can do that via schedule, or I can say I do that immediately, and then I select the device, and at the bottom I say save. And you should see now on the phone, firmware update, and then the phone is downloading the firmware and updating the firmware to the latest version. Again, that might take a moment, but that's just how you can literally monitor or manage these devices. Now, when you have, for example, such a setup with a phone that is on an outdated firmware and the phone system requires a specific firmware to have it working with, when you, for example, on the 3CX now, when you use 3CX's way on how to provision the phone, the firmware would not be pushed to the phone. So you would have the phone sitting there being provisioned, but not registering because it does not have the relevant firmware. Now the phone comes up, and we should see at the top left, it should then automatically become green and not say no service anymore, because it actually would register now. It's the screensaver that came in again, and we see up there, it is green and it has the extension number 1000 that it displays. Okay. I don't want that again. I want actually to go to the next slide. Now, How do we do that with MTR devices? MTR devices are handled a little bit differently. MTR devices can be added and managed by the YMCS, despite of the host system being Android or Windows. We can, depending on their host system, we can do reboot, log file collection, sorry, there's 2 times reboot, config update, software update, packet captures, and remote access. Remote access should be possible for Android devices as well, meanwhile, or at least for the meeting board. But that requires a Pro license. Adding MTR devices into the YMCS, Windows-based, that happens via the Room Connect or the YMCS directly. Android-based via config file, DHCP option, or via the YMCS and the web GUI. On the Windows end, we can do basic troubleshooting, which is reboot, export lock, and then Pro features like screen capture and remote control. The Android side, we can do reboot, reset to factory, update the firmware, one-click export, packet capture, export lock, export config file, config backup, network detection, and screen capture. And again, now also remote control. Now, when we go on to the YMCS, we can also see a peripherals layout where we see what is actually connected there to that system. That's from my test system, which always has different devices connected to it. So therefore, you see there's a whole range of hardware that is shown there. Under normal circumstances, that is not the case. Normal circumstances, it shows you what is actually up there. You can also see that way, for example, devices that are offline, because they will also be connected with a red link. Now, the hands-on, I was using there a Yealink account to be able to do the Pro setup to show you how that actually works with connecting. So we would go into the room device and then we would go into our company. Yeah, you see there in the site directory, besides the site directory, right, you see leader AU. Then we would add the device with MAC, machine ID, and the model. In the diagnosis, there is nothing yet what you really can see. You see the device is pending, so therefore you can't do anything in that regard yet. It also doesn't show you really a peripheral. All it knows is that it has a M-Core 2nd generation connected to it. Yeah. Now, what we would do in that regard is we would start the MVC system. Once then the MVC system has finally booted, it would be shown as up and running. You see, it is online now. So we can go now to the system, we can check the peripherals, we can also look at the diagnosis. We see it has a M-Touch connected to it and not much else. We can export the logs, but we cannot really use screen capture and remote control because I have not had that enabled there from the device yet. That's the next point. So you have to enable screen capture and remote control from the device, from Yealink Room Connect first. So what we are doing now is we go onto the Windows side of the MVC. So we press 5 times the Windows key on the keyboard, and then we log in as administrator using SFB. Now, unfortunately, you see it then further down the track a little bit better. You do not really see it that well there. So you would have to go to DM management, and inside DM management, there are two switches that you have to enable, and one of them would be screen capture, and one of them would be remote control. You see that then further down later on, you see that a bit better. It's just it's hard to take those screenshots, these screen recordings, especially if you are not allowed to remote in and do a actual screen record. You see there are two switches, and these would have to be allowed. You confirm, and then once that is allowed, I can click now there on remote control and say control. And you see now there, just going back quickly, can I? Yeah, oops, sorry, I didn't want that. Sorry. Yeah, so you see authorized remote screenshot, authorized remote desktop. Yeah, and then you can literally do updates on the Windows system. You can do updates on the devices. You can export logs. You can also sign in as Skype, so you're not kicked out like what you are with, let's say, TeamViewer. And then you can, for example, also have the devices set up that way. Sometimes goes a moment after you log in as admin to actually until the YMCS or the room control is starting. Yeah, and then you might sometimes see when you jump in as the onto the room control for the first time, you might see that you have the opportunity to add the device there to YMCS. That is something what you can do then also on Room Connect when you jump in there manually the first time. Yeah. So you see now we disabled it. You have red there. We can't remote control. The session is still running there, but once the session times out or once I jump out of that, I will not be able to jump back in again because, yeah, it is not allowed. You see, that is just not working. So you will have to have a Pro account and you will have to have remote control enabled. Yeah. We can also do screen capture on those devices. Then, for example, when the customer says, "Oh, I have again an issue that shows up. I have that now again." You can jump in there and actually then check for the error message on the screen that you receive. You also will see further down that there are that there's a history in terms of files. If you download files, there is a history there. You can also then say, for example, you do a reboot from remote. We stop that screen capture now because it can take a while until it's actually performed.